Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Eerie Side Podcast with your hosts, Elena,
Sophia,
and D.
Before we get into the show, we would appreciate it if you all could give the podcast a follow and make sure that the bell notification is turned on so you'll be notified whenever we drop a new episode. And if you're enjoying the show, we would love to have you leave us a review. And if there's a case suggestion or any feedback you'd like to share, feel free to leave us a message in the text box below under this episode. And share the podcast with family, friends, coworkers, or anyone you think will love true crime. Please follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. All right, guys. Are we ready to get into the episode today?
Yes.
So this episode is very interesting, and I think you guys are going to just be very, perplexed on this case. But I literally, did all my research, and I wrote this up yesterday, but I feel like I have this whole episode, already memorized, and I can go off of, memory just because of how fascinated I was in this case and the sheer amount of research I've done since finding it.
I'm glad we're recording it because you have been so excited to share this with us.
Yeah.
I can tell it's been building for you.
I also just want to say this case takes place in Spain, and it's an older one, so there's a little bit of lack of information sometimes, and a lot of the resources are in Spanish, so just know that. So just bear with me when there's a few different conflicting reports. The disappearance of Juan Pedro Martinez remains one of Spain's most baffling and chilling unsolved mysteries. Interpol even considered this to be one of the strangest missing person cases in Europe. On June 25th, 1986, the energetic 10-year-old boy vanished without a trace following a horrific truck accident on a remote mountain near the Somosierra community of Madrid, Spain. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance have left investigators and the public grappling for answers for over 3 decades. On the morning of June 25th, 1986, Juan's father, Andres Martinez Navarro, and his mother, Carmen Gomez, set off on a trip in a tank carrying 20,000 liters of sulphuric acid.
They were driving a tank?
Yeah.
Full of... Why?
He was a trucker, so there was just part of his...
Well, that's a disaster waiting to happen.
So just keep that in mind. 20,000 liters, that's over 5,000 gallons of sulfuric acid. So just keep that in mind. The father, Andreas, was a truck driver and brought the family along as a reward for Juan earning good grades. Andreas made a deal with Juan that if he earned good grades in school, he could tag along, and that's exactly what Juan did. He studied hard, he worked for it, and he got the good grades. Now, I believe the mother just kind of tagged along to watch over Juan while the father drove, but not really sure. There are some other theories that we'll get into later. Regardless, they took off for their journey from Fuente Alamo de Murica to Bilbao, and unfortunately, on that June 25th, in the early mornings, Andreas' truck, which was carrying that 20,000 liters of sulfuric acid, was seen traveling around 140 kilometers per hour, which is about 85 miles per hour, on the Somosierra Mountain Pass, where it collided with an oncoming vehicle.
85 miles per hour?
Yeah.
He's driving a truck of sulfuric acid on mountain roads?
Yeah. On the Somosierra Mountain Pass.
If anyone's listening to this and they have not driven in mountains where there's so many turns, it is scary.
This is exactly that. I'm going to show you guys a picture of kind of what it looks like. It's not the best.
Did he suffer a heart attack or something?
Well, we're going to get into what is going on in a little bit. This kind of gives a little bit of how windy the roads were. And believe me when I say this is a very dangerous route to take, and it is very well known for being a very dangerous path because of the mountains, the sharp turns, just all that stuff. So it is known to be a not the safest, especially when you're driving fast, and of course a truck.
This does not look bad. I've been on worse.
Well, no, it's not the best picture, but this is
if you're not paying attention and you swerve off, you're off a cliff.
Yeah,
This is not that bad.
No,
There's worse.
There's
mountains.
worse. Yeah,
there is. Don't get me wrong.
85 miles per hour and you're driving a truck and it has sulfuric acid.
Right. These pictures don't really do it justice, but it does have real bad twists and turns and very steep edges.
Okay, this is where you have to be careful on some.
Yeah,
of
the
these
second
turns.
picture kind of shows you that there is a good amount of like steep drops and sharp turns that you have to be aware of.
Right.
So the accident damaged the tanker that contained the sulfuric acid, and it began to leak. Leading up to the crash, the truck was seen rapidly speeding past other cars, almost going over the edge as it passed each vehicle, and even hitting the side mirror of another vehicle while passing. The truck also knocked another car completely off the road and then fatally crashed head-on with another truck. Obviously, there were witnesses seeing this crazy behavior, and emergency services were already notified before, the truck even crashed. So when the truck did crash, responders were already on their way. When they first arrived, they checked on the parents, but there wasn't anything they could do. They immediately died from the impact.
Oh, wow.
There wasn't anything that they could do.
Wait, the accident, did they fall off a cliff?
Yeah. So they didn't fall completely off, but they did fall into a ditch. So the truck did get knocked over and it fell into a ditch. But when they did go to check, there was only Andreas and Carmen. There was no evidence of Juan. And so they had no idea that Juan was even in the truck to begin with.
That's what I was wondering.
So obviously they begin to deal with the sulfuric acid that was contaminating the area, and so that's what immediately they focused on. They were trying to contain the area as there is nature, wildlife all around.
This might be obvious, but what are some of the negative effects of that sulfuric acid filling in the air towards the other people nearby and the wildlife and animals?
I'm not too sure. I do know that when I listened to and read research that they were saying that they were afraid that the acid would get into the water, like the lakes and stuff. So I'm not sure to what extent it would damage. I do know that sulfuric acid does have the ability to kind of burn skin, so it could definitely damage the grass and the trees and to contaminate the water. Now, I don't know if they were using that water supply for themselves, like people drank from those streams that were there, but they were definitely trying to contain the area. And they were successful in preventing it from affecting the nearby area. Now, once the scene was secure and safe, they began to remove the bodies that were in the truck. They removed Andreas and Carmen, but they were unaware that Juan was previously in the truck, so they weren't looking for him. It wasn't until later that Carmen's mother was contacted that day to tell her that her daughter and her son-in-law had died. And that's when Carmen's mother asked, well, what about Juan? Is Juan okay? Is he still alive? That's when they learned that Juan was traveling with them, and they were shocked. So they immediately began looking for Juan, and they did notice that there were signs that he was in the truck with them in the cabin. They found items such as children's clothes, toys, children's cassette tapes. I've also heard reports that the sole of his shoe was found. It was clear that Juan had been with them, but where is he now? They began searching the surrounding areas with dogs, motorbikes, horses, and helicopters, and they even lifted the truck to see if maybe he was thrown underneath it somehow, but he was nowhere to be found. Now, this case and crash is becoming more and more perplexing to the investigators and what they initially expected. There's this weird crash with a little boy missing and no leads, so the investigators began retracing the family steps and talking to witnesses. While talking to witnesses, one of the witnesses that was in the car that Andreas had managed to run off the road had said that he saw a foreign-looking couple pull up in a white Nissan van to assist him. The man and the blonde woman, and I heard reports that both were blonde or that the man had a mustache, so a man and a blonde woman who claimed to be a nurse. They were all white. The woman claimed to be a nurse or some sort of doctor, and they were wearing white lab coats. So the guy initially just assumed it was some sort of doctor or nurse who was trying to help the situation, but
this is after the crash?
Right. Yeah, right after the crash.
Wait a second. Two people in lab coats appear at the crash?
Mm-hmm. In a white Nissan van.
And They appear at the crash where the truck is, not where they hit other people.
I guess it was kind of both, like they were trailing a little bit behind. So they kind of pulled up to that car and then eventually they went to the crash. Now, I don't know how far between that car and the truck is. I don't know if that person could see the truck or not, but at some point they were driving behind, went to the car, and then later goes to the truck. And I'll get into that in a second.
And they're two foreign individuals?
Yeah, and they knew that based on the blonde hair because they're from Spain and they're like Nordic looking. They were from some sort of Nordic country.
Do they speak Spanish?
I'm not sure. I think they spoke English, but I'm not sure.
There's two individuals driving around with lab coats on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's suspicious.
It's interesting, yeah. Two other witnesses saw a white van pull up to the truck after it had crashed, and the same pair of people got out and took a package from the cabin. Now, what that package was has never been confirmed, but there are theories surrounding it, and I will get into that a little later. So all of this is becoming very, very strange to investigators. There's multiple reports of this couple being at the scene but fleeing before first responders could get there. They claimed that they were trying to help and yet didn't seem to help at all. So the investigators turned to the cabin of the truck where the parents were, and that's where they found trace amounts of heroin and some reports cocaine as well.
Wow.
Now, neither Andreas or Carmen had criminal records or were involved with illegal drugs. But the family did say that Andreas was getting threats for weeks from supposed mafias who wanted him to transport drugs for them. Also, the decision to bring Juan along, some people speculate, may have been motivated more by the couple's attempts to protect him than for Juan getting good grades. Now, this theory doesn't quite align with the fact that the family didn't own the truck Andreas was driving. So, I mean, the heroin could have been from someone else, theoretically, if other people had driven that truck. And, like I said, there's not any proof that he had any ties. Like he said, there was threats that he was getting supposedly from the family members, but nothing that could be proven.
He was getting threats from mafia.
Right.
And why? How did they find him if we even know?
Well, this area is pretty well known by truckers for like cartel and like mafias and who will kind of threaten truck drivers into transporting drugs for them. It's also like a big thing for mafias to kind of target truck drivers because they have that ability to transport stuff sometimes within the country and sometimes outside of the country.
Let me understand. He's just a truck driver. I mean, he does not own the truck himself, correct?
Correct, but I think this was like the truck that he would repeatedly use, but I don't know if during this time anyone else was using the truck, so I'm not certain because this was a while ago and there's not always like clear answers to some of these
My
questions.
other question is, they brought Juan with to protect the dad?
Andreas claimed that he brought Juan along because he got good grades and that this was a deal made, but some speculate that maybe Andreas wanted to bring Carmen and Juan along to protect them from whoever was threatening him. Maybe he thought that they were going to come to their home and do something because Andreas didn't want to transport drugs, but we don't know.
What about the theory that he brought them along to protect him? Mafia doesn't like to attack families.
Yeah.
True.
So if they thought he had his family with, he may have thought he was safe.
That's true, too. But I'm not sure if he would want to bring his kids with him if he thought something could happen. Because I don't know for sure if this was like mafia, drug cartel, so I'm not 100% sure, but it is possible. Upon further investigation, like I said, there were trace amounts of heroin. But while they were looking at the truck, everything was working fine. Because initially they thought, well, it's got to be the brakes, right? There's got to be something wrong because he was driving downhill 85 miles per hour, crashed head on to another truck. So they thought the brakes. But after multiple specialists and mechanics looked over the brakes just to make sure it was clear that they were working fine. However, the tachometer on the truck did show that it made 12 very short stops lasting no more than a few seconds, to the longest being 30 seconds. And he never left the road, meaning he in his truck was driving on this road, stopping completely and then starting up again. At first, it was considered there might have been a traffic jam or some sort of accident. But after talking to witnesses that were there that day on the road and there at the crash, there was no traffic. So these stops that were taken across 8 miles when the family had stopped for breakfast till they had crashed, it was getting strange. Now, I also want to point out that the waiter at the restaurant said that he saw the family, including Juan, get into the cabin of the truck. So we have a witness that puts Juan back into the truck. So we know, at least, after they left the restaurant, that Juan went back into the cabin, which is like the front of the truck.
I was wondering if he was even there that day, so that told me that he was there at some point.
Yeah, there were multiple witnesses during that day because they left the night before, and then they were driving through the night into the early morning. So I think witnesses and stuff were able to corroborate that, yes, Juan was on this trip. So investigators thought that maybe Andreas was trying to communicate with another vehicle or avoid one. But nothing was ever confirmed. Because remember, he's making these weird 12 stops. And he has a truck. So keep in mind, these huge tanker trucks cannot stop and start up easily. So it's very, very strange that on this road, he's just taking these 12 random stops.
Do they say like how far in between one stop to another it was and how often it was?
No, I'm not sure, but I think this all happened within a span of an hour or two. So it wasn't like within an hour or so. Like it wasn't that long, but what's clear is that sometimes he would stop for a few seconds, the longest being about 30 seconds. Where does this leave the investigators? Well, with no further leads and nobody to really help them, the investigation hits a halt. There's a truck that was driving erratically that eventually crashed. There's sulphuric acid spilling everywhere. There's a missing child, multiple eyewitness accounts seeing a strange pair showing up after the crash, and trace amounts of heroin found in the cabin. But with no new leads to go on, theories started to form. It was initially thought that Juan's body could have been completely dissolved by the acid, but there's some holes with this theory. One, Andreas and Carmen were found with the acid on them, and they weren't dissolved. And two, further tests were eventually ran, and it was clear that the boy would have had to been completely submerged for a very long time. Just to get the soft tissues dissolved, it would have had to take about 24 hours of him being dissolved. And for the sulfuric acid to dissolve bones, he would have had to have been submerged for about 5 days. And even then, hair, nails, teeth, that still would have been left behind. To have him been dissolved by the sulfuric acid just wasn't a possible theory in this case. So where is Juan? Given the condition that the parents were in, it's unlikely that he just walked away. And even if he did, he wouldn't have been able to get very far. An investigator searched the surrounding area to see if Juan was there, but they found nothing. That does bring me to another theory, which is some speculate that Juan was in the cabin during the crash. And then when the crash happened, he hit his head, maybe got some sort of amnesia, doesn't really remember where he was, kept going, and then eventually somehow, I don't know, that theory to me doesn't really hold a lot because although it's possible he would have had severe injuries, I would assume his parents were killed upon impact, so you would have to assume that he had some pretty bad injuries if he was in that crash. I doubt he would have been able to get far. It's possible someone picked him up.
Well, my question is, did it look like something had gone through the windshield?
I'm not sure, but they did search the surrounding area of the truck, so if he had gotten thrown out of the vehicle somewhere, they would have found him.
What you'd think. How about his parents? Were they wearing their seatbelts?
I think so. I mean, because they didn't get thrown out. They were in their cabin. I will say the parents were somewhat damaged, obviously, by the sulfuric acid, but they were still fully intact. Another theory is that Juan somehow survived the crash and went to the water maybe to wash off the sulfuric acid and succumbed to his injuries, or the water just washed him away. But they did look in the nearby lakes and they did search them and they didn't find him anywhere. And when I tell you, the search that they did for Juan was very, very in-depth. They were saying they were looking at every bush, every corner, every tree, they were looking for Juan. So I feel like if he was somewhere in the woods or the surrounding area, they would have seen him. Another theory is that this whole thing was drug-related. After the heroin and possibly cocaine was found, Police thought that it was possible another vehicle that was part of the smuggling ring was following Andreas and that he crashed because of the nerves, or that he was attempting to follow another car that had kidnapped Juan. Now, this theory does seem very possible because the tachometer readings and why Andreas was driving so erratically. But again, there's no evidence, I would say, that the family was ever involved in drug smuggling or anything. But it is possible that those 12 frequent stops could have been Andreas noticing that there was some suspicious van following him. And so maybe thought, oh, they're going to try and stop us and try to force us to smuggle drugs. So maybe he tried to stop to let the van go or the car go frequently. And then eventually during the last stop, which I believe lasted like 30 seconds, that's when they came in. That's when they swarmed the truck, maybe possibly at gunpoint, forced Juan out, forced the package into the car and said, you will transport this to wherever we need you to go, and then you will get your son back, which is possible. And it does explain a lot of things, like the stops and, of course, why he was driving so frantically, because no one in their right mind would ever drive like that with their wife and child in the car. It's possible he wasn't in his right mind, right? I mean, his child just got kidnapped. And it's also possible that some people theorize that maybe he was having some sort of medical emergency, which you did talk about, Mom. Now, this would explain the frequent stops, like maybe he was feeling something with his heart, something was going on, and he wasn't too sure, and then he just kept going. He's like, okay, no, I'm feeling better, and then eventually when he was driving, he passed out, and then the erratic driving was Carmen trying to swerve out of the way, but it doesn't explain Juan being missing, and I feel like they probably would have been able to tell with an autopsy or something if he had a heart attack. I don't know if they did an autopsy or what that would show, but I feel like that probably could be debunked pretty easily.
I have a lot of holes with that theory you just mentioned.
There is definitely a lot of holes, and I don't really believe that theory, but...
You said you kind of did, I thought, no?
The heart attack?
No, not the heart attack. The fact that you think it was drug related and that somebody kidnapped him. If somebody's like trying to kidnap you or your child, why are you going to stop so many times? After the first time and this car doesn't go ahead of you, why you keep stopping?
It is weird. I mean, it could also be that he was trying to communicate with another car. We don't really know. There could have been another car that was making them stop. It was brake checking them. We don't know. And it is everything in that theory for me aligns except the frequent stops. I mean, it does explain like that 30-second stop where Juan could have been taken, but those other stops, it is a weird thing. But I feel like to me, the drug theory holds a little bit more weight than some of the other theories.
What I don't understand is if they're already transporting these drugs in a car, they're transporting them themselves. Why go hand a package of drugs to somebody in a truck?
Because I think the trucks can go unnoticed more. And I think that's why, because this is an issue from what I read, that trucks can sometimes be threatened to transport goods, drugs on this specific road, on this path.
That they can be threatened?
Yeah, it is something that happens.
I don't know. I suppose maybe they were trying to get the truck to stop and that's why he was stopping. But nobody else saw that on the road?
There's no witnesses that could say, like, yeah, I saw him stopping, this is why or why not, but no. Personally, like I said, I think it's possible that somehow along the way, Juan was kidnapped and the parents were frantically trying to catch up with whoever took their son and unfortunately crashed. Then the people who took Juan, the couple in the white van, went back to the truck to retrieve something, whether that be the drugs or something else, and then left. There's also, finally, I do want to say this last theory doesn't hold a lot of weight for me, but there is another theory that states whoever that couple was in the van pulled up trying to help saw Juan and maybe took him in hopes of going to driving to a hospital to save him, and then along the way he died in the car and he succumbed to his injuries, and maybe they had a criminal past and they didn't want to explain that and everything. But personally, I don't know, it's a little weird that someone would just take this kid and then try and save them but then not, and just discard the body. It's also possible that this was completely random and some people were looking to kidnap a child. They saw this crash and they took the opportunity, which is very rare. What are the odds that you're driving on this windy road looking to kidnap a kid and then eventually a truck crashes? Well, not looking, but they know they want to kidnap a kid and then they see this opportunity and they take it. It's very, very rare.
I still think it's possible that Juan could have just wandered off and gotten confused too.
Here's a question about Juan wandering off. If he did do that, the thing is he had sulphuric acid burns on him. So if he was lost, he would probably be wandering, trying to find maybe water or something to ease his pain. My first question would be, how long after the accident did someone go to see what's going on?
I would say pretty quickly, because there was a witness, like I said, that saw that van pull up, and I don't think they saw anyone else exit the cabin since that van pulled up. And I guess it's possible that Juan might have walked out before that couple pulled up, and I don't know if those witnesses that saw the van pull up to the truck were there beforehand, but what I do know is that they saw them. It's possible he could have left before then, but after that I would assume those people were still watching the crash and there's other cars around, so I feel like it's very hard. Juan would have had a very short period of time to leave that cabin without people noticing, because the investigators and like the civil guard, like they showed up relatively quick, because remember, people were calling this in, being like, there is someone driving erratically on this road who's going to crash.
And he could have had burns and then thrown at the same time. And then if he's confused or whatever, if it's a really foresty area, he could have walked and died eventually.
True.
The only question is, did they do a thorough check?
They claim they did. It was a very large search party. And Juan's face, though, was plastered everywhere after this was going on. So if he had walked away, he would need to get most likely medical treatment somewhere. And I feel like someone would have noticed him. Someone would have seen, like, okay, this kid is the missing kid, or where are your parents? Something like that. And also, he's a 10-year-old boy. I feel like if he just came out of a crash, his first thing, unless he has like amnesia, but his first thing would probably be to try and find an adult, which I feel like he would probably go to the other cars that crashed rather than just wandering off by himself.
It all depends how far he'd been thrown.
Exactly.
If he had been thrown.
Right.
And the other thing is, if he's been hit, he could walk through a river, and then if he fell in and dissolved him, you wouldn't find bones. It could have flown.
Well, he wouldn't have been dissolved, though, even if he fell into the river.
Over time, did they check the whole area around there?
Yeah. They said that they looked in all like the lakes and the bodies of water. It's possible like he could have been washed out. I don't know if it was like connected to like a bigger, like I don't know how big these bodies of water were, but it's possible that he could have been washed out.
Here's the thing. If anyone did go and take him, if this couple, let's say they took him, I mean, this boy is burned.
Unless he was already gone before then.
Well, if he's gone, why are they taking him?
But they went back to take something else. There was eyewitness reports that 2 people saw this van pull up and remove something from the truck.
They could have removed drugs.
True. But then at that point, I guess Juan would already be with them at that point.
But what if he ran away because he was afraid of them? What if they had been trying to kidnap him or hurt his family or whatever? And so when he crashed, he thought he still needed to run.
Which is true, but I feel like the dogs would have been able to pick up the scent somewhere, unless the sulphuric acid was affecting the scent. But he wouldn't have been able to get very far if he was in that crash. And then they would have been able to find him.
But have you heard those cases recently where the toddlers go missing in the woods and then they end up miles away and they have no idea how they were able to go that far in such a short period of time? So it could be something like he's older, he could have traveled very far.
It's possible.
Yeah. With burns, though, I don't know.
So his parents were killed on impact, so I gotta assume that if he was there, he would have had real bad injuries, so he wouldn't have been able to get very far.
I don't know for sure, because we don't know how he would have gotten hit. I think he would have gotten injured somewhat, but maybe he was the only one wearing his seatbelt and his parents weren't. He would have had different injuries at that point.
True. It's very interesting because it doesn't explain the frequent stops.
Yes, and I will say, if they are carrying drugs or if they want to stay under the radar, causing that scene where you're hitting other cars, obviously it made a scene. People called 911. So I mean, my hunch is that probably something happened to Juan and they were chasing after.
Yeah, I think that too, because 30 seconds, like I said, is a very small window, but it's possible for someone to kidnap someone. And I mean, you hear stories where it's like parents turn away for 2 seconds and then the kid walks off and then they're snatched. So it's what I think, that they were taken beforehand, because Andreas and Carmen and Juan, they were a happy, loving family. By all report, they weren't like particularly wealthy, but they were happy. They were living their life. He was a family man, Andreas, and I don't believe that he would drive so frantically like that with Juan in his car unless he had a good reason. And I can't really think what a reason would be to drive like that while his wife and kid were in the car.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm not convinced that the mafia did this, though. I'm not saying it wasn't organized crime, but because the mafia is known for not hurting women and children, it's really hard for me to think that
it could be like just drug cartels and just some drug trafficking ring. That's very possible. It could be like gang related drug traffickers and cartel gangs are now really worried about hurting a family, or now they didn't transport the drugs, but now we can sell Juan. We're going to take Juan. We're going to say we're going to give him back to you. We're going to have you transport the drugs. We're going to have you commit a crime. And then we're going to tell you we're keeping your kid and you can't go to the police or to the authorities.
Well, at that point, I think you could.
You could, 100%. But I think most people wouldn't.
Because they had committed a crime?
I think some people, if they don't know, they may not.
They didn't want to. You could say, I was forced to... They took my child and they gave me the drugs.
Unless they were planning on after they get to that destination that they're like, okay, well now transport more drugs and then we'll give you Juan. And at that point, Juan's already been sold. I mean, if they were to theoretically have dropped off that first package, if they never crashed, then their plan could have been like, well, we're still going to sell Juan, but we're going to keep this thing going and have you transport more drugs. And this whole thing could have been also about the drugs and Juan. It could have been like a organized crime that does both.
But how would they even know about Juan in the first place? How would they know he was going to be bringing his son? How did they know what his son looked like, what age he was, that his child was even a boy in the first place?
It could not really matter to them. Someone could have seen them at the restaurant. They did make stops along the way from when they left to when they crashed, like they were stopping frequently. It's possible someone could have seen them there.
So this could have been somewhat spontaneous then with Juan.
It could have been.
It was it was a way for them to actually get him to do the drugs.
It could have been like, we need to find a truck. We need to force this truck to transport these drugs. And then they saw this trucker has a wife and a kid. We can use the kid as leverage. You can use maybe the wife too. We'll target that truck. So it could have been somewhat planned, but still random.
If Juan was kidnapped and they managed to get away, I think all that publicity actually hurts his chances, because if people have someone that the general public is very well informed about and knows about, that puts them at risk.
True. It does. And a lot of times they could just kill them. This disappearance is getting too much traction, too many missing person. Flyers are being posted up. Too many people know this kid's face. We have to get rid of him. They didn't expect that. I will say one more last piece of information is that obviously in like the months and years that followed, people started reports of, oh, I saw Juan. And a lot of these reports weren't really valid. But there was one story about 1987 in May where someone in Madrid claims that he saw an elderly blind woman from Iranian descent with a little boy.
That's oddly specific.
A little boy who's guiding the elderly lady, who they claim to be a grandson, and the boy looked just like Juan. Now, while I don't know exactly where this took place, there's a lot of conflicting reports about where this interaction took place, but essentially some guy saw an elderly woman and a child walk in, and they were talking, and she mentioned somehow like she's not from here, they're just traveling, and the boy was translating for the elderly lady, and the guy complimented this kid on his Spanish. What he was speaking was very fluent. And then that's when the older lady took this kid's hand and kind of was like, decided, okay, this conversation needs to end quickly and kind of move things along, and didn't really let this boy really talk afterwards. So it's very suspicious. The boy's accent sounds like he's from Spain.
Wait, where is this taking place?
This is taking place in Madrid.
Well, he's in Spain then.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He's saying that this accent.
This boy, what they were claiming, he's Iranian.
They were claiming that he wasn't from there, that they just traveled there. But
okay.
this guy is like, well, then why does he have an accent that he's from here, and why does he speak so fluently? And it wasn't until later that he saw the missing poster or something of Juan, where he was like, that's who I saw. This is who I saw. And he went back, and by then the boy and the older lady had fled. But I do think it's interesting that this is like the one eyewitness account of Juan that's really the only one that holds any value.
Where did he see this? Was it? You didn't say a laundromat, did you?
No, I don't really know where this took place. I've seen multiple reports of this happening, like a driving school or something like that. Different places. I think it's possibly could have been some sort of government building. I'm not sure, but yes, there was essentially an older, elderly, blind woman who came in Madrid, and it was accompanied by this little boy. He spoke the language fluently. He had the accent, so it just really wasn't adding up. And the lady, once the guy complimented the boy's accent, that's when the older lady began to kind of was like, okay, we're wrapping this up, like not letting him talk anymore. I'm taking more control.
It's definitely weird, but to counter that, children have an easier way of grasping a language in a shorter amount of time.
True.
And accent too. I will say, if it was Juan looks Spanish, but if somebody wanted to pretend that he was Iranian, he could definitely play the part with his feature. I don't know what capabilities they have, but I'm sure if they brought him to Iran physically, he could pretend to fit right in.
Yeah, there was a report I saw once that they were saying like the woman claimed she was just been there for like 6 months, which I don't know if that's enough time for a little boy to grasp a language fully, and then the accent as well.
The boy could have been living there.
She claimed that they all moved there. The elderly lady claimed.
We don't know that. Maybe she didn't want to say anything. Don't forget that during that time, there were a lot of problems with Iran.
Yeah.
And many of the Iranians who were immigrants had a very difficult time in Europe and the United States.
Right.
So it could be she was trying not to have much communication for reasons that we are unaware of.
There was one report that claimed that she had just fled Iran. So it's possible.
It'd be distressful.
Right.
People.
We just fled. Like, why are you talking to my grandson? I don't want to bring more attention towards me than what's necessary. Unfortunately, that's all we really have on this case. What you choose to think happened, it's your own choice and your own theories. But personally, I think something happened along the way from the crash, from the breakfast that they had, the breakfast stop, and the crash where Juan was taken. Because based on what I know about Andreas and how he was as a father and a husband, he just does not seem like that kind of person who would drive so erratically knowing his son was in the car. And then, of course, this weird couple that pulled up and removed something for the car, then drove off. That's not a coincidence, personally. What are you guys kind of leaning more towards?
I don't know. It is a little strange.
I think the whole thing is pretty weird, but given that the truck was stopping so often, and it would be very weird for him to be crashing into people intentionally, especially if they're trying to transport drugs. Like there's traces of heroin and cocaine in that truck, and doing that is bringing attention to him. So I think he must have a very valid reason for doing that. If you forced me to like bet my money on something, I'd bet my money that somebody had kidnapped Juan and they were chasing after him.
I mean, I guess it's possible. Maybe he just hit his head and has amnesia, and it's been 30 decades and maybe, but like, I still feel like even if that was the case.
You think he'd still be alive with amnesia?
He could be. He just forgot his identity and started a new one.
Wouldn't people know him?
That's the problem with that theory is
he could have had temporary amnesia and then maybe like drowned in a lake or something.
True, but for the theory of like permanent amnesia and why he's never been found is just because he's living a whole new different life. It's possible, but I feel like someone would have recognized him, or he would have recognized himself, or gone to authorities or something like that.
I also think it's possible they just didn't find his body.
It's possible, but they combed through that area. I will say. And they did very thorough search efforts, but at the end of the day, it could be hard.
Okay, not to put the spotlight on the dad, but this area is known for being difficult for truck drivers and being asked to carry drugs by maybe dangerous parties. Why would he take his wife and son along?
I think he's done this route a lot. I think he's taken this trip before, and it's possible that he just thought, like, nothing's ever happened before, like, nothing will happen to me. It's possible maybe he didn't know that. Like I said, it was just like a couple reports from other truckers that said that this is possible in the area. Maybe it's not.
Or was there something going on with the family that he knew they were in danger and he wanted to take them with to try and protect them? Something that we're unaware of.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe they were involved in drugs beforehand or something. I don't know.
It's possible. The family did say, that Andreas was receiving threats to transport drugs previously. Now, that's true or not, I don't know. And I think at the beginning, the family pushed more of the drug theory than the investigators. I think they wanted to just say, well, his body just was dissolved in the acid. And then after that was clearly like debunked, they didn't have anywhere else to turn. But I don't know if it's necessarily drug related, but I do think most likely he was kidnapped somehow by someone before the crash, I should say.
Were there multiple cars following them?
I think so.
Just based on eyewitness reports?
There was the car that crashed, and then there was 2 people further back that weren't part of the crash. They were called shepherds and herders. So I guess they were herding their goats.
But these people saw multiple cars engaging with the truck?
Well, they just saw the van pull up.
Oh, the van. Okay.
The Nissan van. And the investigators did try to look into the white Nissan van being driven by 2 blonde people on white lab coats, but there's like 3,000 vans in that area that match the description, so there wasn't much that they could go on.
The bundle that they removed from the truck, do they think that may be drugs or Juan?
Both are possible theories.
Wait, how big was his bundle?
It was reported as like a small package. Now, small can mean anything from like a foot to maybe 3, 4, 5 feet. It
3,
doesn't.
4, 5 feet is not.
Well,
a
I
small
guess yeah.
package.
Maybe it could have been like 3 feet. It could have been a little boy, and you don't know. They just said like a small package.
We need to know the size, because a small package, I'm imagining like a foot long package, which is not Juan. But if it's 4 feet potentially, that could be Juan.
It could have been maybe like Juan was already knocked out, so he was bundled up, and the people were further away. These herders were further back though, so they were pretty far away. So they claimed that they saw like some sort of package
wrapped in what?
They didn't say. They were, like I said, they were further out. If they were like on the mountains, they may not have seen like that much.
I wonder if he felt like they could just not stop and ask for help. These people were loaded with guns or something.
And it was the 80s, so they probably didn't have like cell phones or anything to call the police and say, hey, this is what's happening on this road, and they just kidnapped my son.
If they kidnapped him, then if they went back to the truck, I'm assuming they went back to the truck for the drugs? If they already had kidnapped the boy?
Yeah, I think some of the theories is like there's probably 2 cars, 2 vans, or some sort of 2 vehicles. There's 2 theories. One is that there were 2 cars versus 1 car, but if there's 2 cars, there would have been the car in the front that took Juan. Maybe the car in the front and the back could have forced the truck to really not go anywhere, took Juan out, and then he was trying to chase them. When the truck crashed, the car in front may not have known that it crashed, but the car behind them could have been like, okay, we need to take these drugs out because these are the drugs that we need to transport, and also we don't want the police to find them. The white van, the way it was described and how I interpreted it was like it came up behind the car, which doesn't explain why he was rapidly driving so fast if the van was behind him, unless there's another car in front of him that he was trying to catch up with, unless the van circled back around somehow.
It doesn't make sense for them to kidnap Juan if he was already doing the drugs deliveries. I don't understand why they would feel the need to kidnap Juan if he is doing already the drug deliveries.
I guess the theory is that he wasn't, that they had asked him, he could have gotten threats previously.
But I thought the family said that he was doing it.
No, the reports that he was being threatened to do this, but he hadn't done it yet. I did see a couple reports where the family said that he was actively transporting drugs, but I didn't really include that because honestly, I don't know if that's true or not, because there's no criminal record of him transporting drugs. There's no proof that he ever transported drugs, but some of the families did say that he was threatened to transport. But if he was transporting drugs, I doubt he would have taken his son on that trip, which is why I feel like he didn't set out.
Well, if he was transporting drugs, then why do they need to threaten him?
Well, that's what I'm saying is I don't think he was transporting drugs. I think he probably said no, or maybe he did it a little bit and then he was like, that's it, no more, I'm done, I'm out. And then he was like, well, we're going to take your kid until you do it. And that would be the theories behind the weird 12 stops. Maybe someone went in front of him and slammed the brakes and was like, and another car pulled up and you need to transport this drugs. And he was like, no, I'm not doing it. And maybe this happened a few times and they were like, screw this. And like, we're just going to take your kid and you're going to have to do it. Or you're never going to see him again.
I wonder if maybe he was just not feeling well because he did those weird stops. And if that's so, then there's no drugs and no kidnapping. And it could have been that Juan was just thrown so far away.
Yeah.
And supposedly I think those mountains are pretty thick and difficult. Yeah. So maybe from his burns and all that just happened to pass away. And maybe they did not do a thorough investigation.
Yeah, maybe they thought they did.
And the people who went to go get the package, they were just like stealing from the car.
Maybe they found drugs and took it. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's possible.
I mean, there are people who go through accidents to steal.
Yeah. So in this theory, Juan was in the car and died, but he was still transporting drugs. And then people in the white van were like, okay, this is like an opportunity, and just took the drugs.
Yeah, I mean, if they did, or who knows what they took.
I definitely think that those people probably took drugs out of the wreckage because I don't think Juan was there. I also feel like they probably would have seen blood from Juan if they tested the bloods that they found in the cabin to see if any was from Juan in the crash.
But don't forget you have sulphuric acid all over the place.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
So they are not checking for blood.
Because that would have probably dissolved right
First
away.
of all, they didn't even know there was a third person.
I'm saying later on, if they went back to see, was he even in the vehicle when it crashed? But I guess the sulfuric acid probably would have dissolved the blood.
With the blood, yeah, if he had bled. And it all depends if he was thrown out, how he was thrown out,
but
if he got burns. There's a lot of ifs.
There's a lot of ifs and there's a lot of questions. And this is why I wanted to do this case because one, it's a pretty like well-known case, I feel like in Spain, but not a lot of people know about this case. And it's a very fascinating case. And there's a lot of weird twists and turns. And you're just left with more unanswered questions than you are with answered. And I want to bring this to light because at the end of the day, that 10-year-old boy is still missing after 3 decades or 4 decades now. And I wanted to bring light to the story and to this little boy that unfortunately has never been seen again. All right, guys, I want to thank you all for listening to us this week. We love our listeners, and because of you, we do this podcast. Your help and engagement really helps the podcast grow. And if you enjoy this episode, please text a friend and family member to listen to our podcast. Until next time, make sure you stay on the Eerie side. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. And be safe.